Two of the most common questions I get go something like this. Number one is, where can I buy a bow stave? And number two is, can I make a bow out of some species? Take your pick. And so I wanted to do just a short introductory video on bow wood, where to find bow wood, and the costs and benefits, or the pros and cons of getting your bow wood in different ways. And so there's three basic ways to get bow wood, and those two questions get at two of them, and that's buying bow wood or buying staves, and the second one is harvesting your own. Now there's a third option, and it's a great option for beginners, and that's starting with board bows. And so to get started, we'll just jump right into the pros and cons of buying staves, because that is really what comes to mind when someone starts thinking about, okay, where am I going to get my wood? How am I going to get started into bow building? And so the advantages of buying staves are, one, you've got a tremendous assortment of species that you can choose from. It's very easy nowadays to find good quality Osage staves, even Pacific Yew, and then there's a whole suite of other things that you can buy: hickory, ash, juniper, hop hornbeam, American hornbeam, the elms. There's a broad array of wood out there specifically cut and split for bow making that you can get. The other advantage of buying staves is, when you buy staves from a dealer or someone that's cutting them specifically for bow making, they should be cured and ready to go. When you get that bow stave, you should be able to jump right into the bow making process and start making your bow immediately. Another big advantage of buying staves is you're going to be able to get species that you just don't have access to in your area. For example, Osage has a pretty broad distribution, but it's mainly in the Midwest, some into the South, things like that. So if you're out west, you're just not probably going to have access to Osage and some of the other eastern hardwoods. Now, the downside of buying staves really boils down to economics. Bow staves are expensive. For example, to buy a really good top quality Osage stave from a reputable dealer is going to cost you anywhere from 80 to well over $100. And if you are talking about having that stave shipped across the country, you're going to increase the cost of that anywhere from $40 to $80. And so you're significantly increasing the cost of that stave. Now, if you have the option to go to a place and actually pick through staves, such as the Oklahoma Self-Bow Jamboree, Tennessee Classic, or any of these self-bow focused gatherings around the country, that is the way I would recommend to do it, because you can actually pick through the staves, you can find something that looks really good, you can find clean staves, and you forgo that shipping cost. All right, so jumping into the pros and cons of harvesting your own bow wood. Now, if you have the option to harvest your own bow wood, I would highly recommend it. And if you're in the eastern US, the Midwest, you're gonna have a lot of different options for different species to harvest. You got 5 or 6 different species of hardwoods that are gonna make pretty doggone good bows. You might have access to Osage, but if you don't, you probably will have access to hickory, maybe some of the elms or the hornbeams, things like that. Juniper and eastern red cedar will also make a good bow if it's backed with something, and that stuff you can find pretty much anywhere. So the big advantage of harvesting your own staves is you can get a lot of bow wood for very, very cheap and free most of the time. And even if you don't have, if you don't own land or think you have access to land to go cut wood, in my experience, it really hasn't been very difficult to get access to land. If you are driving down the highway and you see a fence row with a bunch of Osage on it, start knocking on doors and find that landowner, and most of the time, if you explain to them what you're going to be doing with that wood, most of the time they'll grant you permission. And if you want to maintain that permission and that place that you can go and harvest bow wood for years to come, you know, just respect the landowner, close gates if you open them, clean up your mess, pile branches, things like that. So some of the downsides of harvesting your own wood is, number one, it's a lot of work, and it's physically demanding work to cut. First of all, to find, cut, split, and then haul out these staves. These things are heavy because you're cutting green trees. But the big disadvantage of harvesting your own is the drying time. When you cut your bow wood, you're going to be looking at a pretty long drying period. There are some things you can do to quick dry some species. Some species don't quick dry very well because they'll develop drying checks. But like I said, the big disadvantage of harvesting your own is you're going to have to wait a long time before you get started on your bow. Now, if you have access to species like hickory, you can get around that because hickory has a grain that's interlocked, and you can actually cut hickory in the spring, strip the bark off, and start hacking a bow out of that immediately. And at least the species of hickory that I've worked with, they don't have a huge problem with developing drying checks or drying cracks as that wood dries rapidly. So that brings us to the third option, and that's board bows. And I would say for a beginner just getting started, board bows are a great way to do it because you can get lots of material, you can get it very cheaply, and you can afford to make mistakes. And making mistakes is something that you're gonna do. It's just a part of the learning process, and it's actually something that you need to do. You need to make mistakes because that's how we learn. This is the way that bow building should be approached. It should be approached as a journey, not with the mindset that I'm gonna make one bow and it's gonna be an awesome bow and then I'm gonna go hunting and I'm gonna kill every species in North America with it. You might do that, but probably not. You're gonna learn a lot on that first bow, and then you're gonna be thinking about that on the next bow, and you're gonna apply the things that you learned on your first bow to your next bow. And then you're gonna apply what you learned on that bow to the next bow. I've been building bows for 20 years, and I'm still learning about bow making. I don't know, I've made hundreds of bows, and I still learn something with just about every bow that I make because there's no limit to what you can try. There's no limit to what you can learn. And when you start making bows and you keep making bows, you always have something in your mind that you can, you know what, if I tweak this one thing, I think I can make this bow a little faster, or I think I can make it draw a little smoother, or you know, whatever it is, whatever characteristic you're after, there's always something in your mind where you think you can tweak something and make it a little bit better. And that's the great thing about bow building, is there's no limit to what you can try. So now I want to take just a few minutes to address that second question of, can I make a bow out of X, Y, Z species? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can. You can make a bow out of just about anything. And so when it comes to the difference between bow wood and non-bow wood, it's not a question of whether or not you can make a bow out of it. It's how well that bow will perform. So I've got two bows here, and we're gonna take just a few minutes to talk about some terminology. Now, this is a recurve. We'll get into that, the difference between a recurve and a longbow here in just a second. But I want to talk about the parts of this bow. So we're going to talk a lot about the belly of the bow. The belly of the bow is what's facing you when you shoot this thing. The back of the bow here is facing away from you. This is the handle. This is the riser section. Obviously your limb tips and your nocks. All of this stuff you'll hear later in future videos in this course. Some of the stuff that I'm about to mention is fairly academic, and you don't really need to know this to be able to make a bow. But what it will do is allow you to better interpret your results when you do make a bow of some species or some design. You'll be able to look at the results that you get and have a better idea of why you get the results using this method versus this method, or this species versus this species. Now, if you think about the forces that a bow has to withstand when it's being shot, when I draw this bow, the belly is going to be under compression, or these belly cells, the cellular structure here, is going to be under a compression force That force is trying to crush these cells. The back, on the other hand, is under tension. So the cells and the fibers here on the back are trying to be pulled apart. And so we'll take Osage, for example. That's what this bow is made out of. Osage just happens to be very, very good in both of those forces. And so it's very resistant to coming apart under tension, and it's very resistant to these belly cells being crushed or under compression. The other top tier bow wood is Pacific yew in North America, and just so happens that that species, the heartwood, which would be on the belly, is very, very good in compression, or very good at resisting compression. And the sapwood, which is on the back of most Pacific yew bows, is very good in tension. Now, a lot of the whitewoods, hickory, elm, hornbeams, things like that, they fall somewhere in between. Hickory, for example, is very, very good in tension because it's got those interlocking fibers. You can't hardly break that stuff. Now, when it comes to compression, it's okay. It's not the greatest wood in compression. Now, when it comes to whitewood, one of the things that we're going to talk about later in this series is making those woods better in compression. And we do that by heat tempering. We take a heat gun and we toast the belly wood, which hardens that and makes it more resistant to compression. And so, getting back to that question of, can I make a bow out of so-and-so species? And the answer being yes, only difference being how well those bows are going to perform. A really good example is the difference between a bow that's made out of a hard maple, like a rock maple, sugar maple, something like that, and a soft maple, like a southern red maple. You can make a bow out of both of those species, but they're going to perform vastly different. Whereas the hard maple is fairly good in compression. The southern red maple is a very soft maple, and when you make a bow out of that, when those belly fibers are exposed to compression forces, those belly cells will just collapse. And what that causes is a bow that stays bent when it's unstrung. It takes a tremendous amount of set or string follow, and that makes for a very, very inefficient bow. And so to summarize that, good bow wood has to be able to withstand the forces that are applied on the bow when the bow is shot, and that's tension on the back and compression on the belly. The text that accompanies this video covers several different bow woods, and I tried to cover at least one or two bow woods from all areas of the country. So no matter where you're at, you should have something that's described there. Now that text is gonna, describe where you can find those woods and some of the peculiarities that are inherent in those woods. Now, I will say that there are a lot of good bow woods out there that just aren't covered in that text. There's so many good bow woods that you could write an entire book just on bow woods from around North America and the characteristics associated with those woods. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you're in some specific area of the country, the Southwest, for instance, look for what you have available there. And if there's something that you think might work, just experiment with it. It doesn't cost you anything. And also you can get on some of the different primitive archery, traditional archery forums where there's bow builders that are taking part in that, and just ask people what their experiences are with different species of wood. In this series, we're gonna use Osage a lot, but that doesn't really matter. If you're working with elm or hickory or something else, everything basically is the same. Whether you're building, it doesn't matter what kind of wood, even if you're building a board bow, all the things are gonna be the same. There's gonna be specifics like chasing a ring and things like that that are gonna be specific to certain types of woods. And if you're working with yew, it might be thinning out the sapwood. And so different woods are gonna have different things, just little peculiarities that are characteristic or specific to that species, but for the most part, the bow building process is not going to be any different, whether you're building a board bow, an Osage, a hickory, or a Pacific yew bow. But every bow that you make is going to teach you something that you can apply to the next one.